Okay, Eric, Star Trek trivia, go.
Yes, Star Trek trivia. That. Who said, I was not aware, Mr. Barris, that 12 Klingons constitutes a swarm? A. Spock. B. Captain Koloth. C. Kirk. Or D. Cyrano Jones? We
Oh,
determined that the internet gods decided that your argument was weak.
well, no, you're right, but it could be. Well, you're right.
Speaking mean to me. I have sensitive millennial feelings.
Spunky.
Welcome to a piece of the action. I'm Micah,
I'm Eric.
And I'm Greg.
and today we are looking at Power Grid, game from 2004 by a designer named Friedman Freeze. Eric and Greg sat down and played this recently, and this is exciting week for us because this is going to be our first week when we get to kick one of the games off of our shelf, or we get to kick out Power Grid itself. Maybe it won't be good enough to make it on our shelf. We'll find out, but we're going to hear their thoughts on Power Grid. And Eric, we'll start with you. What is the premise of Power Grid?
In Power Grid, you take on the role of a power company trying to supply energy to the most number of cities. So you take turns bidding on factories, buying the rights to power cities, and then purchasing raw materials to fuel the factories that you own. And
Power plants.
Power plants, sorry, yeah. Yeah, not factories, power plants. And then powering cities is what makes you money, and you use that money to do all those things that we just mentioned on your turn. So after one player has bought a certain number of cities, I think it's 17, right, Greg?
17
cities?
in many of the player counts. It depends on
Okay,
player
it's a
count.
player count thing. After a certain number of cities have been bought, like the rights to those cities has been bought, then the game ends, and whichever player can power the most cities wins.
Okay, so sounds simple enough. Let's talk about, Eric will ask you as well, how do you feel like, if that's the premise, how do you feel like it did when it came to delivering on or executing that, making you feel like you were really running a power company?
I think it did pretty good, actually. I think it incorporates the theme pretty well. The power rights that you purchase are placed in a central map, which gives you kind of a visual sense of expansion for your company. And then there's a nice little market mechanic that's built into purchasing the resources, and that feels thematic as well. I would say that the one spot that I didn't like the way the game meshed with the theme was in the bidding for factories. So there's 4 to 8 random factories that are available to purchase at any given time. But the way a player buys one of those is by choosing one, and it goes up for auction. And then during that round, each player then in turn order gets to increase the asking price or pass. And I actually really like the bidding part of this game, but I don't think it fits very well with the theme of purchasing power factories. It almost feels like there's just some guy out there who's building power factories and then putting them up for auction, and just feels kind of weird. It's a minor quibble, though. I will say.
I wonder, since it's am I correct in saying that this is a Euro game?
It is a Euro game, yes.
Okay, so in Europe, are power companies handled by like private entities that build, that build independent power companies, as opposed to there just being one big power company that does everything? Could that be a source of the discrepancy?
I have no idea. I did not dive deep enough into the research on this game to figure that out.
Okay. All right. Greg, what about you? You have anything to say about the theme of the game? Do you feel like playing a power company to you, or not? I mean, not particularly.
Yeah, I mean, it covers an economy, I guess. Like it's an economic game, so it does feel that. It evokes that. It kind of, you can kind of feel the bureaucracy, I guess, of running a power company in it a bit. You have to buy land rights, and in order to get to like certain parts of the map, you have to pay the connection fees to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of ways, it feels like you're having to buy land rights and like, okay, well, we got to buy the rights so I can build my power lines through,
Yeah.
Aunt Sue's backyard, or so. It kind of feels that way in a certain degree. And plus, another thing Eric didn't mention is, and this is a really important mechanism in the game that I'm going to talk about a bit here, is there's a turn order mechanism. And basically the more cities you have rights to, the further ahead on the player order you are. But the problem with this game is if you're the further ahead in the player order you are, the worse everything is for you. Your resources are going to be more expensive. You're the last to put to buy places on the map. Auctions are more difficult for you. And to me, I've always reasoned that thematically that this is the government cracking down on monopolies. Like you're becoming too big, so your taxes are kind of like becoming more. I don't know. That's kind of I've always reasoned it in my head. But yeah, I think it does the theme.
Okay. So it's interesting. It's a theme that's sort of public utility company easement acquisition, the board game. So
pretty much.
So awesome. What about how did it feel to play? What would you say? Does it feel tense, under pressure? Is it competitive? Greg, why don't you take that one first?
Yeah, I think it's a very interactive game. In fact, I would go as far as say this is the most interactive game we've reviewed so far. There's 3 main phases, as Eric alluded to, and each of them are interactive in their own way. The bidding on the power plants, auctioning in general is going to be interactive. The supply and demand of the resource market matters because it's a really clever system they have here that basically the lower on a track, so oil, for example, to be an oil track, and you buy from the left to the right. And the lower it is on the track, the cheaper the goods are. And so you buy it. So that means now you bought the cheap ones. The next person to come along is going to be more expensive. And each turn, the game only puts so many resources on it. It's a set amount that it puts on that track each turn. So it's only going to fill up so much. So if too many people are in that resource, it starts to get really expensive for everybody. And it's a neat, very simple, elegant mechanism that makes that whole, there's a fight for those resources if everyone's in it. So you kind of have to pay attention, well, okay, there's too many coal plants out here. I'm going to just jump into the ore then, or something like oil or something like that. So that, and then there's just a grid, basically the map, and you can play on either United States or Germany. That comes to the base game. That's almost like Ticket to Ride. It feels very Ticket to Ride-ish to me. It's a network building game. So if you're in one spot, people can basically block you from moving through their city. Now you can pay, but you have to pay extra because now all your neighboring cities are bought out. So okay, I can't go to Chicago, so let me pay 2 connection fees that go through Chicago to the other side. So that makes the whole board feel tight. So yeah, in each of the 3 phases, it's very interactive. Another, I guess, with the feel of the game too. This is going to come up, I believe. If I know anything about Eric, I think this is going to come up in way later in this video.
Yeah.
Towards the end of what we do normally.
Okay.
It's a very mathy game. Very mathy game. So there's the whole thing of the auction comes in the beginning. So you kind of have to figure out, well, resources, how much is that going to cost me to buy that I need? And what cities do I want to go to? And I have this much money. And you kind of have to figure that out in advance to work out how much money do I have to auction with. Because that's the most flexible amount, I guess. You can kind of foresee how much your cities and resources are going to cost. But auction, who knows? So there's that. I mentioned already the board is really tight. But there's an ebb and flow to that too, because there's 3 phases. So in the beginning, only 1 person can be in each city. But over the course of the game, you eventually enter like phase 2. Now 2 people can be in the city. And then even phase 3, there's 3 people who come in the city. So it's kind of like this, it gets really tight. And then phase 2 opens up and okay, it's relaxed again. Then it gets tight again and then it gets relaxed again. And I will say this too, that turn order mechanism is pretty cutthroat in itself. There's a constant fight for where you are in that because it's important. You don't always want to be ahead in that because, like I said, that can really punish you. And then on top of all at the end, because it's an economic game, there's this feel of investing. I make money, I spend all of that in this turn to get better. I make more money this turn. I take all that money and I spend it again. So there's this constant making money, spending it, making more money, spending it. And so it kind of has like an engine feel in this game for that reason.
Okay, Eric, what about you? Thoughts on the
I
feel
wanted-
of the game?
Yeah, I wanted to mention, I didn't think about this before, but with regards to the theme / feel, I didn't actually think about the different cities, the other cities opening up. That could be representative of those cities increasing in population, and now you need more power. I'm actually a little bit surprised at how well the theme works with this game on, you know, surprisingly deep levels.
Mhm.
And I agree with the feel. It feels very tense. It feels very it's an economic, it's definitely an economic game at its heart. And I don't know, that always makes me stressed. So that's how I feel when I play it. I feel stressed.
Okay. Let's go ahead then and talk in general about things that a new player going in might want to think about, sort of proto strategies that you might want to be aware of, that you guys might have put together from multiple plays or your first time through, things you wish you'd known to pay closer attention to. Eric, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I was thinking about this in preparation for the video, and I think that in general, it's just a good idea to keep in mind the ultimate goal throughout the game. And that goal is really specific. It is, as soon as possible, power 17 cities with 3 power plants. That's what you have to do. That's the ultimate goal.
That's the
But of
win
course,
condition.
that's a win condition. But packed into
Well,
that is a bunch
to be
of
clear, just to clear, it's the end. What marks the end. Getting to 17 cities marks the end of the game, and then whoever can power the most cities at that point wins.
That's
the game.
right. So
So
if you ended the game with 17, if you were the one who bought the 17th city and you can power all 17 cities, and you have a maximum of three power plants, then you win.
Okay.
a good chance. There's a good chance.
Good chance.
Someone
If somebody
could
else
get-
did it too, then it could tiebreaker with
Yeah,
most
or they
money.
could get to 18 cities. You know, who knows?
18 cities, yeah, something like that.
They have a chance or more. You know.
But they would have.
But yes.
But wouldn't they have ended the game on?
Well,
when
no,
they
because you
hit
get to finish
17
the whole
cities?
round.
You
Well,
do,
no, you're
okay.
right. But it could be. Well, you're right. Well, maybe you're right. Yeah. But let's put it this way: if you can power 17 cities with 3 power plants, and you get to 17 cities, there is a very good chance you'll win.
Okay.
But let's leave it
Possibly,
at that.
possibly
And I
even
think
a 100%.
A 100% chance, possibly.
That is very good. I like those odds.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
but packed into all that, there's a bunch of mini goals. You know, like if you unpack that ultimate goal, you've got things like, well, you have to purchase 3 power plants that can accommodate 17 cities. Not all your starting power plants, they only power like 1 city. So that's not a good power plant. You need to upgrade that eventually. So you need to get better power plants as you go, since you can only have 3. So you need to eventually get 3 power plants that can accommodate 17 cities. You need to purchase raw materials that can power those 3 power plants. And you need to buy the rights to 17 cities. And doing all of that in the most efficient way that's the key to the game. Did you want to add anything there before I have more to say on
Well,
that, but
I guess let me just, so it sounds like what you're saying when your piece of advice is to keep your eye on the end goal, is that in essence saying that there are lots of little things along the way to distract you?
Yeah, totally. Because you can get distracted with like, okay, I want to try to block Greg, so I'm going to buy up a bunch of I'm going to play a little vindictively and buy a bunch of resources that I might not necessarily need. You can hose yourself that way by spending too much money on stuff that you're not necessarily you don't need to buy, or purchasing a bunch of cities before you can power them. That's an inefficient way of spending your money. So it is important.
Okay.
So, but basically, the punchline is that almost all those things that I mentioned, they all have the central component to all those things is purchasing. So money is the most important thing in this game, and estimating how much you have to spend is and where that money is going is the biggest part of this game. So in my opinion, when it's your turn, what you need to do is you need to start by looking at the resource part of the board. And you need to say, and you estimate how much money you're going to spend in fuel for your power plants. And then take note, it's important to take note of other players who have power plants that need the same kind of fuel, because if they go before you, Greg mentioned the turn order and how important that is in this game. If they go before you, then it's almost certain that you're going to have to spend more than the current asking rate for those resources. So you got to plan your resource buying with some wiggle room. And then after you've allotted money for resources, you decide if you want to prioritize buying cities or if you want to prioritize bidding on power plants this turn. And then you assign money to those things. So let's say you want to do power plants. If power plants are your goal for this turn, then find the one you want, because you can only ever buy one per turn, and set that money aside. And of course, don't forget to add a few more, because people might upbid on the power plants. Then after that, go back, whatever you've got left over, that's what you can spend on purchasing rights to cities. Or if cities are your priority for that turn, then just do it in reverse. You can figure out how much money you want to spend on purchasing cities, and then whatever's left over is how much you can bid on power plants.
Okay, so but just make sure you have you go into it with kind of a focus in mind.
Your money allocation is super important, and it's like I said, you start with your resources first. In my opinion, you start with resources first, because you got to power your power plants, otherwise you're not going to make any money that turn. Then figure out, okay, what's more important, getting another power plant or purchasing city rights, and then allocate your money that way. Oh, and one other thing, it's a really good idea in the mid game. I made this mistake actually. Last time we played, it's a really good idea in the mid game to start transitioning to a different type of resource. So if you rely on coal or oil all the way through the game, then you're going to end up either getting shut out of a resource because some other player bought it all. But even if that doesn't happen, then you're going to end up spending way too much money on those resources late in the game. So around the time that you want to start buying end game power plants, and by endgame power plants, I mean power plants that can power 6 or more cities. By the time you're ready to purchase one of those power plants, that's around the time you want to start transitioning to a different resource. Okay. So those are my noob
ideas,
recommendations. Yeah.
Okay. So Greg, what do you think? You agree? You disagree? Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of maybe a little more specificity on that power plant thing. Because Eric's right. So you win the game through how many cities you can power, not through how much money you can have. That's an important thing to remember in this game. Now, money is super important in getting that going, but you have to think, I'm usually at 17 cities. So yes, that's a good mark to hit.
It's always
and yeah, it's not always 17, but it's for most, I think it's like 4 and 5 players, 17 cities, which is a player count.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, what's the player count? What's the running time?
The box says 2 to 6. I say 3 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I would say, just like King of Tokyo, actually, I think the 4 and 5 is the best. 3 and 6 are still good, but I think the 4 and 5 are the ideal counts on this.
The sweet spot.
2, I can't even imagine, unless you're playing with the robots expansion, which I wouldn't care to. I can't even imagine playing this at 2-player. Running time, maybe 30 minutes per player. It can go anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours, probably.
That sounds right.
Yeah. But anyways, so 17 is usually the number you're having to hit, because that's a common player count number. So in my mind, I think of it as, so the power plants go from powering 1 city up to 7 cities, I think. So basically, for me, 5, 6, and 7 in my head are the permanent plants. If you know 18XX, you know there's some trains that never rust. You call them permanents. I think of those power plants as permanents, because you can power 17 with 2 5s and a 7, or a 5, 6, and a 6, right? So once you get into that range, you're good. So in my mind, I always try to buy 6 power plants over the course of the game. You get your first 3 just because that's what's available. They don't power that many cities, but you need to make money of some sort. usually by the time I get my 4th plant where I'm going to replace one of those plants, I want to make sure it's a 5 or higher. Because I don't want to keep buying power plants.
Right.
So trying to get to 17 in your power plant capacity, I think, is a big deal. And I agree with Eric. In the beginning of the game, coal and oil are the cheapest. Trash and uranium are the other 2 resources. They're always like super expensive in the beginning. Depending on how people buy power plants, that market eventually gets cheaper. But I think coal and oil are kind of always going to be around because there's so many of them that power 5, 6, 7 power cities. So you just kind of got to read the market and know where to go on that, I feel. But also power plants are the easiest one to get locked out on. So, I think it's a big deal. And I will also say, though, there's a 5th type of power plant, and that is the green ones, the eco-friendly ones that don't take any resources whatsoever. They just power this many cities with no resources.
Solar powered or something.
Yeah, exactly. Solar powered, wind powered, that's how they're represented. I will say this. I almost always find new players overvalue those.
Yes,
almost always.
I think they're a trap.
They can be. I say if you can get them at face value, sure, go for it. But I will see new players bid those way up. They're not worth it because not for the price. Their cost rate to the amount of cities they power are just not that great.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying they're bad, but I'm just saying if you're a new player, be careful of the trap of valuing them way too high.
Okay.
I don't know. People get in their mind like, I'm going to be like California and just power my whole country on 3 solar panels. I mean,
yeah, that's, by the way, that's not true, California. Wake
no,
up.
I know. I know.
Okay.
Anyways, but that's kind of my take on the power plants. Another thing is, I think when you're new, you don't realize the importance of that turn order track. That turn order track is, to me, one of the crucial parts of this game. And there's this impulse to just kind of like want to race ahead, and then you just shoot yourself in the foot. So in a lot of ways, this game is, in some ways, I think it's like Dominion in this way. It's you kind of want to hang around the middle of the pack or the back of the pack, taking the luxury of getting those extras, just getting your engine kind of going, and then at some point realizing, okay, now I don't care. I have enough money coming in. I can just floor it out ahead and try to get first place. So that turn order track, I think, is the hardest part of the game to get your head wrapped around. But don't underestimate that. And I think that's pretty much all I got on strategy. I'm not good at this game, but that's kind of like, I think, some base level new player stuff. Yeah.
Between
Greg
the two,
won,
or how many people played when you played?
4?
This week
Five
we played
of us, right?
at
Oh wow.
four
No. We played 4
player.
player.
Yeah, but I've played this at all the
Jeremy
player
and
counts.
Scott.
So.
And who won?
Greg did. Greg's
Greg.
played it a ton.
Oh, okay.
I haven't played a ton, but I've played enough.
You played it a lot more than me.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk then about the good and the bad. What did Power Grid do well? What did it not do well? Greg, why don't you start off by telling us what you liked about Power Grid?
So, should be no surprise, I'm a big fan of like economic games. I'm a big fan of these whole building up this, investing in things and getting return. I think Power Grid is one of the best introductions to that genre. This is not a heavy game. I think that's another plus to it. The rules to it are pretty simple. I think it's like a 6 to 8 page rule book with plenty of pictures in it. So it's very lightweight on the rules, but there's a ton of depth in this game. It's a deep game. There's a lot to it. And so for me, it's when a person's like, hey, what kind of games you like? And I'm like, oh, I like these kind of heavier economic games. And they want a recommendation, and I don't know what they can handle. Power Grid's one I'll recommend a lot because of that. It's a good taste of what the genre has to offer. So I like that. The other thing I like about the game is it is interactive. I like interactive games. I'm not saying it's at the other end of the scale on interactivity, but it's definitely more interactive than what we've played up to this point, I think. And it's interactive the whole time. Like there's every phase of it is. There's no board that you have in front of you doing puzzles on. Everything is together. Everything you do affects other players. So that's pretty cool. And I think my favorite thing about this game, actually, though, is that it plays 3 to 6 players. Finding a game that is got this much meat to it that's not some all-day affair like TI4 or something. That can play 5 or 6 players within a few hours and still be meaty. It's not a party game, and it's not here I stand. This fits that nice middle, right? Like there's not a lot of games that do that. So 3 to 6 players is just a wide enough player count, and I'm a big fan of games that play a wide player count. So I'll give it that, and the weight. That, in addition to the fact that it's easy to learn and it's still deep, just kind of hits on all those cylinders for me. That it's a game I like pulling out quite a bit, actually.
Okay, all right. What about you, Eric? Pros of Power Grid.
Yeah, I'm enjoying this review here with you, Greg, because we're actually touching on some different points that you mentioned some things that I haven't mentioned, and I'm not planning on mentioning, but I think that they're good points. And I was going to mention just the feel of the game in general. I really like the feel. It feels like a classic game to me. It's kind of reminds me of a grown-up version of Monopoly. And Monopoly is not fun, by the way, but there's something to Monopoly that has like made it last. And I don't know, there's something about Power Grid that kind of has that same feeling to me. It's you're not giving your money to other players, but it still scratches that same kind of microeconomic build a business empire vibe that I think has made Monopoly last. And like Greg said, there's a lot of player interaction. You need to know who's going to be bidding for what resources. You need to know which cities your opponents are likely to buy and where they fall in the turn order. All that stuff is really important. It's not as interactive, I would say, as like games that are focused on player interaction, like like a Captain Sonar or like a war game or something like that. It's not going to be that style of player interaction, but for a Euro game, really, really big on the player interaction here. This is not a multiplayer solitaire by any means.
Yeah,
and
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to ask, do you guys feel like, is this the most interactive game that we've covered so far?
I do. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, unless you count code names.
I was going to say, but it's the party game,
it's interactive in a very different way. It's more of
exactly.
That's more of a social interaction. This game is more
you know what?
interaction.
I think there's more interaction. Remember what we said about code names in the review? Like it kind of shuts it kind of shuts down conversation a little bit, actually.
Yeah.
For a party game. So yeah, I might say this is the most.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I do agree with you that it's maybe not super direct interaction in Power Grid. It's not like combat, like I'm fighting.
Right.
But
I always feel like I need to make that distinction because it's not when we say player interaction, it's not like that kind of player interaction.
You mean like
you're never really destroying other people's things.
Right.
I think that's the distinction. Maybe it's not like I can do something that will like tear down your power plant or rip you out of a city. I can't do that. It's more like we each have our own strategic engine, and they're always getting each other's ways.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you're describing it makes it sound like the interaction is I have to pay attention to what you're doing. I have to look very carefully at you, and your plan has to occupy a lot of real estate in my head.
And I would also say that like Greg likes to use the term, your own lane, finding a lane.
Mm-hmm.
That is a big part of this game too, because you don't want to jump into buying power plants that everyone else that use the same resources as everyone else. So you want to, if everybody's buying power plants that are green or are going with coal, nobody's bought oil. You might think real heavily about buying an oil power plant because then you don't have to worry so much about fighting over resources. So there's that kind of player interaction, and the decisions that other people are making as far as what they're buying are gonna directly affect you, your choices.
And to add to that, like every game is you're paying attention to what your other players are doing. Even in Dominion, you're kind of like, oh, what cards are they picking up? I think that the why Power Grid is more interactive is because how many points of contact there are, right? There's so many places where that intersects that you're more interested in what's going on because there's so many places they can block you or cut you off or take something you want to buy or make things more expensive for you.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's just there's a constant intersection between your engines.
Okay.
I also think that there is a lot of game to be played here, so it's very dense. I think it's very satisfying. If you like market economy style games, then the resources track is a really cool little representation of that. Or if you like bidding games, then the power plants phase of the game covers that aspect. And if you like expand across the map style, if you like that kind of ticket to ride feeling of buying, or you're expanding across the country, then buying the power rights in cities, that feels like that. So there's a little something for everyone here.
Okay.
Oh, and I like the art. I really like the look of the game. So it's really easy to read. The iconography is really clear, and the art is nice. It's got this thick line art, kind of has this industrial feel to it. I kind of dig that.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead then and talk about the bad. What did Power Grid not do well? Eric, back to you again.
Well, Greg alluded to my eventual problem
Downfall.
that I was going to have. Yes, the downfall of Power Grid here being its mathy nature, and it's just because everything in this game is all about money and projecting where that money is going. So it can be kind of a beast when it comes to basic math. And I don't want to give the wrong impression. It's not like you're doing quadratic equations or anything, but little simple math mistakes can really hose you in this game. So also, you can only be certain of the exact cost of the only thing you can be certain of as far as cost is buying cities, because the other two places where your money goes, that being the bidding on power plants and the purchasing of resources, those things fluctuate based on the other players. So if two players really need coal and one of those players goes second, then that player is going to find the coal that they need is either exhausted or much more expensive.
Mhm.
So or someone will try to bid on a power plant that you need and raise the price. So altogether, what that means is it turns your money management, which is the all important thing in this game, into kind of algebraic equations. It's like you don't know what X and Y are going to be.
Mhm.
So that makes it a lot harder. So, and I just don't think that's very fun. Some people might, and I'm the first to admit I was not very good at math in school. So maybe it's just me, but I find that aspect kind of tedious, you know. And the other thing I don't like about the game is that if you calculate all your money and you find out that you've got some fun money for the turn, you discover you've got some extra cash to burn. It's very little skin off your nose to totally ruin someone's game by buying up all the resources that they need for a turn. And so
you
that
can
part of the
take
game.
that them.
Say again.
So you can take that them.
You can, and that's where I was.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminded me of Ticket to Ride. Now it's not as bad as the arbitrary cruelty of Ticket to Ride, like where an opponent can just plunk a train down in front of you and fairly easily and mess up your whole game. It's not that bad,
Mm-hmm.
but so it's not as easy as that. But I still think there's a pretty big incentive to trash someone else's engine with very little cost to you. If you've got some extra cash and you have the opportunity to buy coal, and I look over and Greg needs coal, I see he needs coal to power his cities the next turn, I can just buy all the coal. And then that's it. He's not going to be able to get that coal. He is not going to be able to power his cities, and he is not going to make any money. So now he's got no money. So now how does he get that back? It's very hard.
Spiral of death.
Well, I heard. So that's the thing. I heard the one of the designers interviewed about this game, and he said that there were some catch-up mechanisms built into the game, but I really don't know what those are, and maybe you can elucidate me on that, Greg. But I didn't see any. If somebody does that to you, it's not like the game's over, but it's a pretty big blow, and it's And all it takes is your next door neighbor who's buying resources before you to discover that he's got extra cash that doesn't have it's not earmarked for anything. So those are my negatives.
So Greg, what about you? What did Power Grid not do well?
So I was going to say I agree with a lot of what Eric said, but I want to disagree with his last point where he said that it can take that, because you can only buy resources that you can use. I can't just go and buy coal if I don't have a coal plant, just to spite you. Now, if I have a coal plant, you are allowed to buy as many resources as your plant can consume in 2 turns. So if it uses 2 coal for 5 cities, whatever, well, that'd be pretty good. But I could buy 4 coal maximum. So it's not like even if I have extra money floating around, I would probably, hey, I have extra money this turn. I would probably think to spend it. Let me get the resources now during this turn so I have it for the next turn. You know what I mean? And maybe that hurts somebody. I mean, I don't know. I don't see that as a thing.
So there are some limits on.
I thought about that. And I agree with you. I agree that it's not as bad. That's why I was very clear. It's not as bad as I think I phrased it as the arbitrary cruelty of Ticket to Ride, where you can just, destroy somebody's chain, But you might not need that coal because the tightness of like where that extra money goes. You might want to save it for your next turn. You might not need the money, but you can choose to spend the extra cash to buy coal that you would not necessarily need to make sure that your opponent doesn't get that coal. And by doing that, you can, especially in the late game when the resources are thin, you can really destroy somebody's for very little.
And I think an example that's the last game we played, I did that intentionally to Jeremy, because if I didn't do that, he was going to win. But I don't necessarily think that is necessarily.
Yeah, I don't know. It's and this is a debate I kind of want to have about this subject because it's a valid strategy because the game is all about efficiency. If you make the other players less efficient than you, then that is a valid strategy. I just don't think it should be so easy as all that. I don't know. There's something about the way it's done, and maybe it's just because I'm on the receiving end of that sometimes. That feels wrong. It feels wrong.
I don't know that it is easy. Because it is such an efficiency-based game. If I'm just blowing my money just to hurt Eric, I just don't think I'm going to win. It's not a 2-player game, so it's like unless you're way ahead and I have to do it
could be a 2-player
to stop
game.
you from winning, right?
Well,
I mean, it can be, but
that was
I give you a specific example, and I kind of wanted to talk about this because I think it's a really good example of the interactivity of Ticket to Ride, not Ticket to Ride, Power Grid we're talking about, and how some of this meanness can come about. So in the game we played, Jeremy was really close to getting to 17 cities and winning. And I realized that. So on my turn, on that turn, because I was going first in player order that turn, I could make it work out, where I made sure I did not get into enough cities, so that was coming last in player order in the next turn. Deliberately, I did that. So that one, I get good auctions, so I could get the right power plant. Because I wanted a coal power plant, because that's what Jeremy had. And then that also meant I had first dibs on the track. So I only needed 3 to power my cities that turn. But I realized that if I bought a 4th piece of coal, Jeremy could not power all of his plans because I'm deliberately targeting Jeremy's. But for me, that's a winning move. It's not take that if you're doing the move to win. I mean, that's just the nature of having to win, I guess.
So in that specific instance where you specifically planned like a move ahead to get into the winning position on the turn track and took 1 extra piece of coal to make sure he couldn't do everything on his last turn, that fits with your previous description of when we had the discussion about take that in a previous video, and how out strategizing someone or coming up with a better plan or a better engine that just outworks another player, I think that fits into that realm. But when a player who is, for instance, in an example where a player who's not doing well, and maybe they should be spending their money somewhere else, what's the opposite of king making? It's kind of where you can ruin somebody. Just it's very Lauren-esque.
Gesture making? I
for,
don't know.
for lack of a better word, it's Lauren-esque, which is a inside reference. But it's very
Capricious.
capricious. Yeah,
And
where
mean.
someone who's not good at the game can just play the game in a very very casually mean kind of way. And
Yes, I don't know.
the
I
fact that that's
never
an
thought of
option
that
just
with
kind of
this
bugs
game.
me.
So
I've always found this game to have I've always considered, even though it has a lot of interaction, I've always thought it was very indirect. Like it never felt mean to me at any point. I don't know.
Well,
And
buying
part of it
somebody
is
else's
because
resources where they can't power their all their stuff on the very next turn, I think that the repercussions of that is pretty dramatic, and I think that's kind of mean.
what I think what is for me, the games with this much open information is power grid, because it actually is. Aside from what turn the power plants come out, it's
And how
all
much money you
open,
have.
available information. And so for me, if I can think it through far enough in advance and I can see the attacks people can carry out on me, it makes it feel less mean to me, because, well, I should have saw that coming. Now, if people are just arbitrarily attacking Eric because they just don't like you, I guess I could see that be annoying. But I just don't see how that's a problem with power grid by itself. That can be any game, right? I mean,
Could, but
just
it
target
could, but
you.
I just that some games I find they lend themselves to that kind of like, oh well, I'll just, and it, like I said, it's not as bad in my opinion as Ticket to Ride. I really have a problem with Ticket to Ride just because of that whole, like, on your turn, one of your actions is lay track, and you just lay some track. You can put it anywhere on the board, and you just lay some track in front of somebody, and you ruin their entire connection. Very arbitrary. It's not as bad as that, but the fact that your resources can get at by another player to the point where you can't get, and money is everything in this game. So if your money flow gets hosed by not being able to power your cities on a turn, that really, I don't know what the catch-up mechanism for that is, because that seems like that's it.
Yeah.
Seems
Well,
like that one
I
thing
guess
puts you in such a bad position that, like, doing that once to a player seems like that might just kick him out of the game,
sure.
out of the running.
And I
What it
guess
feels like to me.
maybe the main difference is I see that as potentially being mean, but I guess I just never see it as being arbitrary.
Greg, what were the rest of your negatives?
So yeah, just to touch briefly on, this is kind of what Eric talked about too, because I actually don't really have any strong negatives about this game. There's nothing I could have thought of, so I'm going to bring up negatives that I see as being potential negatives. And mathiness is on here because it is the number one reason I have seen new players bounce off this game. Some people just don't like the math. And I think that aspect of Power Grid is both overstated and understated, if that makes sense. Because Eric is right. You're not doing calculus here. You're just adding together double-digit numbers. So it's not that complicated, but he's also right in that even though you are just doing arithmetic, you're doing so much of it over the course of the game. And you're constantly having to redo it because you don't know what's going to be happening. So it's just the constant doing the math. And this interesting thing about this game is I can't remember the year where it came out. Was it 2004? Somewhere around there. I feel like if this game was designed today, the numbers this game uses would be different. Because the numbers in this game are all odd.
Okay.
And I don't mean odd like odd and even, but I mean it's not like you're adding together 10 and 20 and 30. It's like this is worth 5, and this is worth 2, and this is worth 23, and this is 41. And so you kind of like have to constantly be juggling, like adding like 10 or 11 of those numbers on a turn, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in this day and age, if they made this game, everything would be 5, 10, 15, 20.
They would smooth that out a little bit.
Yeah, so it feels like in that way, it feels like an older game in that. And it's compounded by the fact that your auctions are in the beginning of the game, each turn. Because the auctions are the ones where you kind of have to know how much money I have to spend. So you kind of have to calculate in advance what can I do on the board. And like Eric alluded to, there's a variable range there depending what the other players do. So in a lot of ways, I just kind of work at worst case scenario. Just go with that. Like if everyone bought everything I needed, how much money do I have to buy all the coal I want? That kind of a thing. I will say this though, I always allow calculators in the game. Even it helps some, but because you're doing so much math, now this doesn't bother me, and it's kind of tied in with my second negative. That's a potential negative for some people. Is it is a bit fiddly. I will point this out. So this is a sign of an older game to me. This is the back page of the rule book. This is like how many resources go on the track based upon what phase you're in, based upon how many players are playing. This is a chart. And then in the next page, this is a chart of the numbers that change depending on how many players are playing, how many cities you have to play to. So even though it's a simple game, this is a short rule book, there's these charts. This is a chart everyone has in front of them. This is how much money you get paid depending on how many cities you power.
All those numbers are odd.
It's like,
those are
weird,
weird
right?
numbers on that chart.
So that just kind of makes the whole game fiddly. And then there's like restocking that resource track. There's a lot of money being exchanged. And the way the power plants come and go, the way some get discarded is kind of an odd exception. So there's all these fiddly bits on an otherwise elegant game. Now, the reason why none of this bothers me is because I like economic games. And in these kinds of games, fiddliness comes with the territory. Adding up math comes with the territory. For me, it's all worth it for the game that you get. But I understand why some people don't like that initial tool that you need to have to get to the crunchy bits. You have to do all of this math. I get that. It doesn't bother me though. My final gripe about the game, that is kind of my only real true gripe. Look at that box. Look how stupidly big that box is.
I see.
It's like this weird shaped box. That always bothers me when boxes come in weird shapes like that. It can't quite go on the shelf right. I have to pull up my shelf a few inches just so that it lays flush with the rest of the boards. Anyways, that's a small gripe, but I do complain about that. Oh, it comes with paper money.
I was going to say, I knew you were
stupid.
going to mention paper money.
But I have poker chips, so there you go.
Which only partially
That's
fixes
my
that
negative.
problem, because you can't. The money is secret information, and so poker chips are a little harder to keep concealed, I think.
Okay.
Greg might have cut out again. I
I
don't know.
agree, but I mean, I don't like playing with hidden information, so.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, let's go on then to final thoughts before we get to our elimination round. Would you recommend it? And we'll start with Eric.
I would recommend it, actually. I think this is a good game, even though I do think that the math thing isn't my forte. But I actually agree with Greg. It's not enough to ruin the game. There's a lot of good game here, and I think that it's worth pushing through the mathiness. My biggest gripe would be the problem that I mentioned with the resources. But if you can think far enough ahead and plan around that, then you can mitigate that to a certain extent. It's not that bad. What I will say is that the first few times I played this game, I was tired, and I thought I hated this game because actually that copy that Greg has on his shelf back there is a copy that I gave him to pay for my share of a legacy game that we all went in on together, that maybe we'll get to one of these days. But
Did your being sleep deprived help your math skills?
It made it much significantly worse. And so I got, what happened is I was just tired, and I got frustrated, and I couldn't math it out, and I was like, I'm not even, I kind of threw in the towel early. And when you're so play this well rested, and if you like economic games that aren't that heavy and that have a lot of really fun strategies in them to explore, just make sure you've got a Red Bull in front of you and go for it. You'll have a good time.
All right. Greg, what about you? What do you think? Anything else you want to say? Would you recommend it?
Yeah, in a similar way, it's grown on me in the same way. The first time I played this game, I actually also didn't think I liked it, but for a different reason. That turn order mechanism, the first time I played with it, felt like a catch-up mechanism to me. And maybe that's what the designer was referring to. Because if you can't get cities on the board, you go further behind, everything becomes more expensive for you because you're ahead. And in the beginning, the first few times I played it, that annoyed me because I don't like catch-up mechanisms. And it took me playing enough times to realize that that is actually a tool in the game and not a catch-up mechanism. Getting yourself into the right position on that track is a big deal. And that just kind of opened the game for me once I got into it. So this game gets better and better every time I play it. Right now I give it an 8, but that can go up because it's been steadily going up. It hasn't reached its peak yet, I think. And I think mostly because it's a light to learn game, but it's a deep to play game. It's brain burning, as Eric alluded to. So that's why I like it. It's a light game to pull out. That's also very crunchy. That plays a lot of players. So yeah, I do recommend it.
All right.
I take
great.
offense at you constantly saying that I'm alluding to things, Greg. I don't just allude to things. I say them clearly and directly. That's the third
What-
time you've said I allude to things.
What do you?
Oh,
What do you?
Anything from this game,
What
it's
do you mean by
evidence.
that?
I don't like direct interaction, so I'm trying to be, very soft with my verbs I choose with you. I don't want you to think I'm picking on
You're
you.
mean. You're playing mean. You're speaking mean to me. I have sensitive millennial feelings.
Yeah. All right, so we have our 10 game shelf, and we now have to decide whether Power Grid gets to go on the shelf or not. If it does go on, what comes off? So it's up to you guys to sort of hash it out. So who wants to go first?
Well, we got to be clear here what we're doing here.
Yeah.
So this shelf is if me and Eric were forced to share a game shelf between the two of us that contained only 10 games.
Yeah.
Which 10 games would be on that shelf?
Yeah.
So
You
me
and
Eric
Eric
are
kind of
sharing
cool.
the shelf.
You and
It's
Eric
kind of a cool
are
experiment.
you're in a prison where the warden has given you a shelf. Your roommates in a prison cell, you have a shelf that the warden will allow you to hold 10 and only 10 board games on.
Yeah.
And
Wait,
the
I'm
way-
You can
I'm
play with
trapped.
the other inmates. So
Yeah.
Hold on. I'm trapped in a cell with Greg. Can
yes.
Can I get something with rope?
So, okay, so that's the deal. You guys have to decide between the two of you what games you want to have on the shelf at the end of the day. What's going to be left standing? So,
Well,
you know what's on
I
it already, and we'll throw up a picture with
Yeah.
what we have on it so far. Power Grid, does it stay? If so, what does it kick off?
well, I think I've had Carcassonne on my radar for a while now, so I don't think Carcassonne really is. I've reviewing that one, watching that video again. I said multiple times that it felt like an activity to me more than a game. Power Grid definitely is better than Carcassonne, so I would say that's my vote.
That's your vote.
yeah, and I think Power Grid definitely belongs on the shelf, mostly because if we're only having 10 games, I think player count is going to matter to me a lot, right? Because I need games I can't play games that are only good at 3-player, if I only have 10 games. So I think Power Grid, just for that reason alone, belongs on it. And I was prepared to kick off a few games on the shelf. There's a few I would then, okay, I'll kick that off. So I'm fine with Carcassonne getting kicked off.
Okay.
That doesn't bother me at all.
It is a little too bad that we don't have another. I mean, maybe eventually we can get maybe a Zool on the shelf or something like that, but another tile placement game. So, I mean, if you care about having representations of different types of games, that's our only tile placement game.
I don't care about representation of types of games, but I do care about weights because I want to have games that fit different possibilities, right? So I don't want a shelf full of nothing but heavy games or full of nothing but light games. But at the moment, we only have Agricola and Puerto Rico on the shelf for the heavy category. So I'm definitely okay with another one getting on there. I feel like we're kind of got a lot of light games at the moment that are family weight, so I'm okay with Carcassonne winning.
Yeah, Carcassonne.
All right.
Burn it.
That's it. So goodbye, Carcassonne. Hello, Power Grid. Power Grid will take up that slot. And what are we going to talk about next?
We're talking about Splendor.
Splendor. Okay. So let us know what you thought. Then, do you agree with Greg and Eric's decision, or are you incensed that they've removed Carcassonne? Let us know. If you've played Power Grid before, let us know what you thought.
Now, just to be clear, the expansions could potentially put Carcassonne back on. You don't know.
True.
You hear that? All right. So until then, please remember to like this video. Please remember to subscribe to us. Anything like that helps us out, as we're a new channel. And until then, this has been a piece of the action.
Wow.
All right.
I don't know this at all.
I mean, the way it sounds, I can hear Spock saying
Yeah,
it.
right? I could.
So, like,
Cyrano Jones was the guy that sold the tribbles to the Enterprise, right?
yes. So I
Yeah.
think this is definitely the tribble episode.
But he was in the tribble episode.
He was, as was Captain Koloth,
Well, and as was Kirk and Spock.
of course.
Right.
So the line again is, "I was not aware, Mr. Barris, that 12 Klingons constitutes a swarm."
It does. Well, it does sound like a very Spock thing to say,
It
but of
does.
course you're kind of reading it in a Spock way.
I
too,
didn't.
so-
I did it there. I didn't. I intentionally tried to read it plainly.
All right, this
All right,
one.
well,
This might be one I'm wrong on, but I'm gonna go with Spock.
Incorrect.
Cyrano Jones.
It was Kirk.
Kirk.
Oh,
Yeah.
It
Kirk.
was Kirk. I think that might be the first one that we've completely gotten.
Yeah,
gotten
I
wrong.
think that is.
It was either, you could either read it with like a dry sense of humor like Spock,
Yeah.
or with kind of like a wise guy.
Yeah,
Like
like
Kirk.
yeah.
He has that little cockeyed smile at the very end of it.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware, Mr. Barris, that 12 Klingons constitutes a swarm.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, now you say it that way, it's obvious it's Kirk. It's just
Yeah.
the way that you read it.
Way to
It's
read
all
the
in
question wrong.
It's all in the delivery.
I'm blaming the question giver in this one.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome, guys.
Okay.